After weeks of intense negotiations, Kyiv and Washington have signed a critical minerals deal. First mooted by Donald Trump in February, the agreement has been understood as a condition for U.S. support for Kyiv. Antonia Kerrigan brings us up to speed.
After weeks of fraught negotiations, a breakthrough. A much-touted minerals deal between the US and Ukraine may now be close at hand.
It is truly an equal, solid international agreement on joint investments in the development and reconstruction of Ukraine between the government of the United States and the government of Ukraine.
Donald Trump arrived in the Oval Office poised to slash military aid to Kyiv in its three-year-long war with Russia. But the idea of gaining access to Ukraine's rich natural resources, first mooted in February, gave him pause. He ended up suspending military aid nevertheless amid a breakdown in bilateral relations. But under a new joint investment fund, Kyiv could trade mining licenses for US companies against cash and potentially military aid from the US. After a previous signing fell through in February, Donald Trump pushed for Ukraine to be considered a debtor in any minerals deal, trading access to their natural resources for past US aid Trump valued at $350 billion. So the new text marks a coup for Kyiv.
The American side can count new military aid to Ukraine, I repeat, only new aid, as a contribution to the fund.
Kyiv estimates that 5% of the world's critical raw materials are in Ukraine, as well as large deposits of rare earth metals. Yulia Sviridenko's trip to Washington comes as US attempts to broker a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine have yielded only a few short-lived ceasefires. A new minerals deal could rehabilitate damaged ties between Kyiv and Washington.
Well, let's cross live to Washington and get the very latest from our correspondent, Fraser Jackson. Fraser, the lead up to this deal has certainly been a saga. Tell us what else we know.
Yeah, well, of course, we thought that this deal was going to get signed at the end of February, but then we ended up with that now infamous bust-up in the Oval Office between Volodymyr Zelensky, Donald Trump, and the Vice President J.D. Vance. What we know about this deal is that it's substantively the same as that first deal, as we were told by Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, just a couple of weeks ago. This agreement will establish an investment fund between the US and Ukraine in coordination with a mineral resource agreement between the two countries. That was the last-minute snag on the signing, as the US wanted the main minerals resources agreement and the creation of the investment fund document signed at the same time. Well, Ukraine had planned to sign that at a different time, but that hurdle ultimately was overcome, which led to this deal now being signed. The Ukrainian's Prime Minister said that the fund will be replenished with contributions from the United States and Ukraine. The fund's profits will be reinvested exclusively in Ukraine, a lot of that going then towards the rebuilding of Ukraine, effectively. Ukraine's Deputy Economic Minister, before this deal was signed, had said that the agreements will be forward-looking. He said it's not aimed at repaying for US support for Ukraine, but on giving the US the opportunity to profit from its defense of Ukraine through investments. Well, there's some slightly different language coming from the Treasury in the wake of this deal signing. The Treasury says, in recognition of the significant financial and material support that the people of the United States have provided to the defense of Ukraine since Russia's full-scale invasion, this economic partnership positions our two countries to work collaboratively, invest together to ensure that our mutual assets, talents and capabilities can accelerate Ukraine's economic recovery. So no word in there about paying the US back for the money that it's given to Ukraine, but also no real security guarantees either, which was hoped for by the UK and France.
Well, let's talk about Europe and their reaction to all of this. What reaction are we likely to get from Brussels?
Well, of course, the Europeans wanted this minerals deal to be one way of securing American interest in Ukraine so that the Americans won't walk away from Ukraine. And now the Americans are saying that this is exactly what this deal will provide. But what the Europeans wanted was the US to go a step further and provide material and security guarantees for the Ukrainians. This deal at the moment does not include that. So you were looking at things like long-range missiles, Patriot missile systems, systems, HIMARS, things like that. Those are not in this deal, but of course the Europeans want that to be part of a wider ceasefire deal, which would stop the fighting altogether. Now, of course, the Russians at the moment say that they are willing to sign a ceasefire deal, but their actions say otherwise. And Donald Trump is starting to get somewhat annoyed with both sides, with the US in recent weeks hinting that they could walk away from these ceasefire negotiations. But Donald Trump met with Zelensky in Rome over the weekend at the Vatican, in fact, and that conversation is said to have gone well. And now really the onus is looking more likely to be put on Vladimir Putin to come to the table. But the idea of swapping land, which some US officials had floated, so the US has floated that Crimea would have to be recognized as Russian, according to some reports. While the Europeans say that that's a no-go, and the Ukrainians, of course, are desperate to maintain their territorial integrity. So there's still some way to go before an actual ceasefire deal gets signed, but this minerals deal will act as the kind of wider backdrop for any deal which will go forward. So it's likely to be welcomed by the Europeans as this deal now gets finally over the line, albeit months after we thought it was going to be.
Fraser, appreciate that update. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed there.